But yeah, thank you everyone for joining this webinar on empowering PFAS disclosure in products. We have a great lineup today of presenters. We've got Allison Smith from HKS. She's going to be talking about PFAS from a designer's perspective. And then we have Arlene Bloom and Seth Fernandez from Green Science Policy Institute to talk more about the science behind, just what Green Science Policy Institute is doing from a class perspective, taking a look at chemicals from a class perspective. And then we've got myself, Corey White. I'm the technical director at HPDC, and we're going to be talking about the technology tools that we're using to help with PFAS disclosure. If you have any questions, again, you make sure to use the chat. And at the same time, I think Allison and Arlene and Seth, we're going to be sharing contact information in the chat as well. So if you have any questions outside or want any demonstrations of anything that was presented today, feel free to get a hold of us via that contact information. But with that, I will turn it over to Allison.
Great, thanks, Corey. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Smith. I'm a sustainable design leader focused on healthy and sustainable materials. I work at HKS, which is a global architecture and design firm that does some amazing work on some pretty cool projects, including SFO Harvey Milk Terminal 1, Boarding Area B, SoFi Stadium, Parkland Health Moody Outpatient Center, each of which is making a positive impact on their local communities and within the industry. But HKS is also deeply focused on advancing industry thought leadership, research, and advocacy. And this is why we support organizations like HPDC through membership and as volunteers on the board, technical committee, and technical subgroups. But HKS is also a founder of Mindful Materials, which we developed when we wanted to make getting sustainable transparency and documentation easier for our employees. And when we shared what we were doing, other firms asked if they could follow suit, and the Mindful Materials Collaborative was born. Next slide, please, Corey. So one area of focus for us is following a class-based approach to get some of the most harmful chemical ingredients out of the supply chain. And one of those ingredients is PFAS. HKS has identified 8 different chemicals of concern. Each of these posters start to highlight some of the health impacts, building products, and everyday activities that lead to exposure. And substances can move out of products through off-gassing, shipping, peeling, or abrasion, and substances can move into our human bodies through breathing, eating, drinking, or by touching. So we're committed to using this transparency documentation to reduce exposure to these harmful chemicals. And these posters have been really great in helping to communicate some of these impacts to people throughout our firm and to our clients. Next slide, please. And we know that these chemicals, including PFAS, are connected to many health outcomes, which may come from direct or indirect exposure throughout the product's life cycle. And through regulatory research, we know that PFAS is not banned in in the supply chain throughout at a national level. So, and then additionally, through product-specific research, we rarely find PFAS reported in an HPD or other transparency documents, which we believe is because it's either used below the reporting threshold or used in manufacturing, but possibly not within the product itself, or used upstream from the final manufacturer and simply just doesn't get reported. So we're looking for ways for manufacturers to report the absence of PFAS in their building products. Next slide, please. And HKS, like many other firms, are signatories of the AIA Materials Pledge, and one part of this pledge addresses the elimination of hazardous chemicals and substances. We're reporting our progress annually, but need information, tools, and resources to make measurable progress. Alongside this, a group through Green Commons developed a letter asking manufacturers to eliminate PFAS from their products. And as architects and designers, we want to do the right thing, but it's not always clear how we can do that. I expect you came here today because you have some similar commitments to eliminate PFAS or to the AIA Materials Pledge and struggle to know if you have eliminated PFAS from your products used in buildings and interiors. Or perhaps you're working in one of those communities that has enacted legislation around PFAS, but don't know how to ensure that you're following it. I would love if you would share in the chat why you're here today. I want to understand why you're passionate about this topic as well. Next slide, please. This quote from Dr. Claudia Miller at an early HKS Green Week highlights the impact that the industry has on the health and well-being of the public. And it's not only about occupancy loads and exiting plans like we learned in school, but about decisions that we make every day. And in this case, decisions about which products we select and specify or install in our projects. Can have a lasting impact on the people, animals, and environment for generations to come. So please join in me in asking for manufacturers to report what they are doing to help ensure the elimination of PFAS from their products. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Allison, so much. Man, these resources here, what a great way to illustrate the points that you're trying to make. So thank you so much for that. Next, we will move on to Arlene. Arlene's going to take over the screen sharing. So I will stop sharing. Arlene, you can take over and I will let you introduce yourself. But really the point is we're going to get the science now behind a lot of the transparency documentation that manufacturers are going to be creating in the near future.
So I'm going to talk about PFAS-free solutions for healthier materials, healthier buildings. We're the Green Science Policy Institute. We write peer-reviewed papers that reach actually thousands of people. We communicate them using media, and then we bring together business, government, academia, NGOs with the goal of doing whatever is necessary to stop the use of harmful chemicals like PFAS. And so we have a history of changing government regulation, but even more effective is working with business, manufacturing to change, and then purchasers. And I think most of you listening are, as manufacturers, you're purchasers of products. And you can have a lot of impact through your purchasing choices, which is what HPD and our institute can hopefully help you with. So there are tens of thousands of chemicals out there, indeed more than 10,000 kinds of PFAS, and it takes years of scientific research and advocacy to regulate just one of these chemicals. And after you regulate it, it's very expensive, as you know, for manufacturers to change their processes. So after the chemical is regulated, often the chemical producers will say, well, we have another chemical. It's almost identical in structure and function. We don't know about the toxicity, but it's probably fine. So do you think it's fine? Probably not. Out of these tens of thousands of chemicals, we came up with the idea of dividing them into 6 classes or families that had similar structure, function, and potential for health harm. And those are the 6 classes, of which PFAS is the one we're going to be talking about today. But I encourage people listening to go to 6classes.org, where you can watch a 4-minute video around each of these classes and learn where they're used, why they're harmful, what you can do to reduce exposure, and a success story, because we want people to feel encouraged that once we understand these classes better, we can make better decisions. And the other classes are antimicrobials, flame retardants, bisphenols and phthalates, some solvents, and certain metals. So it's 4-minute videos. There's an intro, so 7 times 4 and 28 minutes. You can really learn a lot about harmful chemicals and how to reduce their use in the products that you manufacture and the products you buy. So now we'll go on to PFAS. And that stands for a bit of alphabet soup for polyfluoroalkyl substances. And there used to be 2 very commonly used PFAS, the 2 in the picture. These are called C8s because they're 8 carbons surrounded by fluorine. And the one called PFOA has what's called a carboxylic acid at the right end, for those of you who remember your chemistry. And the one called PFAS, PFOS, is 8 carbons with a sulfonic group at the end. And the reason that these chemicals are so problematic and indeed so useful is that the carbon-fluorine bond is the strongest bond in the periodic table. It takes the energy of lightning to break it, so it makes these chemicals give good properties like water and stain repellency, but they're called forever chemicals because the bonds really never break. And all the ones that have been studied, unfortunately, have been found to be harmful. So harmful chemicals that stay on the planet forever, you only want to use them if they're really essential. You don't want to use them lightly or just for not a good reason. And if you think about health harm, they are multi-system toxicants. So different PFAS operate through different mechanisms, but they have been shown to cause cancer and harm. They're endocrine disruptors, and they harm many, many organs in our bodies. So they're best, as I said, only used when they are necessary or essential. One of the places that they have been found a lot is in drinking water. And why are there high levels in drinking water? It's because of communities' exposure if they live near airports, military training areas, industrial production sites, or wastewater treatment plants. Wastewater treatment plants aren't responsible. They just gather up what's upstream. And so this was a map nearly a decade ago of areas where PFAS was detected. And we were able to trace back to where the PFAS came from. And at that point, there was said to be a health advisory level of like 70 parts per trillion. And we calculated, I think, 6 million people's drinking water contained PFAS. Now, what's believed is the health level is much, much lower, and much, much more people have PFAS in their drinking water. And taking it out is really expensive and hard to do and maybe impossible. So we like to say that PFAS are problems, they're hard to clean up, and it's better not to use them. And to do that, you want to keep them out of products and particularly building materials. One example from our work, kind of one of the more miraculous examples that I have experienced is it's in 2017, we realized from an EPA study that the greatest exposure to PFAS for young children was carpeting, because they'd crawl on the carpet, they'd put their hands in their mouths, and PFAS treated carpets have been linked to high levels of PFAS in blood. So we decided to try to talk to the carpet industry, all of whom were based in Dalton, Georgia, and we wanted them to come to Berkeley to learn about the science and policy of PFAS. So fortunately, we work with our Material Buyers Club, which are these big companies, and they have all come together in their purchasing to require transparency and to use their purchasing power to create a demand for healthier products. And they all use PFAS-free carpeting. But if you went to Home Depot or Lowe's in those days, all the carpets had PFAS. So they invited the carpet industry, who came from Dalton, Georgia. And indeed, we were told the people who made 92% of the carpets in the US were in the room. And that we had a day where they heard the science. They had gone from that long chain C8 to what was called the short chain C6, which had similar harmful properties to the C8. And the scientist explained that C6 was not going to be better than C8 and was harder to filter out. And then their customers, like the Material Buyers Club, said, we don't use PFAS carpeting in our offices or our hospitals or our schools, and we don't want to have it in our homes or our daycares. And then companies like Levi's that had stopped using all PFAS spoke up about how they were perfectly successful and fine without PFAS. And miraculously, at the end of one day, the carpet industry decided not to all get together. And they all had to agree to have a level playing field. And they all decided to stop using PFAS. And that was in 2018. And we knew it had
Arlene, Arlene,
Yes.
can I interrupt really quickly? We only have 8 minutes left, and I still need to do my presentation. So we're going to need to
Sure.
really hurry it up here. Sorry
Okay.
to interrupt.
We're on our last, believe it or not, we're on our last slide. So good. Anyway, so PFAS, the carpet industry did get out of PFAS. And if people want to know more, we have a PFAS central website, PFAS free page. Oh, and Seth wants to just say something about the precautionary list. Sorry, I used too much time. Go ahead, Seth.
I will very briefly go over these. I am at Green Science Policy. We developed 6 classes precautionary lists. They are lists of cast numbers for each of our 6 classes. These are not meant to be restricted substances lists, but rather they should encourage manufacturers and buyers to look at the materials that are, or the chemicals and materials, and decide if the chemical is really necessary and if it's worth the potential for harm. And we can go to the next slide. One of the lists that we did develop was the PFAS precautionary list. In 2021, our PFAS precautionary list had 9,200 unique PFAS, so that's 9,200 unique cast numbers. In 2025, when we updated the list, we had nearly 17,000 unique cast numbers for these PFAS, and you can see the source lists below. And this precautionary list is one of the source lists for what Corey will talk to us about.
Okay, and just to say, if you want to learn more, you can go to our websites, any one of them, and by reducing the use of PFAS, we can have a healthier world. So I will stop sharing and pass it to you, Corey.
All right. I'm going to have to go at lightning speed here. Okay, so thank you so much. I'm going to get through your slides here. And the slide deck will be sent out. So next is, just talking really about the tools. So long story short, similarly to what Allison alluded to before, we evaluated all the HPDs, found PFAS in very little, really only 10 unique cast numbers were found with products that had PFAS. So we're like, okay, why is this? So first off, we thought PFAS is probably below the reporting threshold of 1,000 or 100 parts per million. And or manufacturers might not know that PFAS is in their product in the first place. So we came up with some solutions for these things to support specifically manufacturers, because if we support manufacturers, we know better products are going to be made and it's going to be easier for the design community. So the first solution that we did is we created a PFAS attestation tool that goes below the reporting threshold. So that's number one. So I'm sharing my screen here. So if I come into the HPD builder, if you come all the way to the bottom, there's the PFAS details, and here you can now, state whether, hey, yes, this has intentionally added PFAS. No, this does not have intentionally added PFAS, and you can describe, like, yes, the substance role and what it's used for. And you can say, is this essential use as defined by the US EPA? So if you say yes, right, are you exploring methodologies or alternatives to PFAS, and what are those alternatives? And from there, you can then have an attestation on your HPD that we can then track in our repository. So you can easily come in here, let us know if there is PFAS, if there is no intentionally added PFAS, etc. Okay, so let me see if I can reset this here. So for example, if there's no intentionally added PFAS, we could say, we reviewed it with lab testing. If you are doing lab testing, which most common people are using total fluorine, you can verify and put all of this information in here. Maybe you're taking a look at the GSPI 6 classes, right? And maybe you only looked at your specific chemicals, but you also want to take a look at your suppliers as well, right? You can talk about how you're doing this sort of work. And the nice part about this is if you come, this is the home screen, if you come into the HPD public repository, you'll be able to then screen the different HPDs based on whether there's the GSPI 6 classes show up or not related to the HPD. So from a sourcing perspective, you'll be able to do this with a couple of clicks of a button, as long as the manufacturers are disclosing this sort of information in their HPDs. And so that's really, the tools are what we wanted to give manufacturers, so that it was a little bit easier for them to understand if there's PFAS in their product in the first place. So sorry, I'm not going to be able to go through too much of that right now, but the other piece here is we understand how difficult it is for people or for manufacturers to even know where to start. So another thing that we created is we created this best practice hub here on the website. If you come to the Material Tool Suite, HPD Open Standard, Best Practice, and PFAS, we have a PFAS attestation request template. We actually have the GSPI PFAS spreadsheet that you can send with this attestation that it refers to. And we have our typical best practice on how to use the PFAS attestation within the HPD Builder. We have a manufacturer's checklist for beginning, maybe they're just starting their journey with PFAS. A guide for laboratory testing, and then what to do if PFAS is found in your product. So these are some tools that we're trying to provide manufacturers, and we're trying to keep them up to date. Things are constantly changing and moving with this topic, but we're trying to at least give manufacturers a good starting point. And with that point, the other kind of part 2 of the solution is providing a screening tool to allow manufacturers to screen PFAS in their product. So maybe they haven't started yet and they just want to have a starting point somewhere. Well, what they can do in the HPD Builder here, if I reset this again, they can come down to the PFAS, they can say unknown on PFAS, and then it asks, do you want to screen them against the GSPI 6 classes? We can say yes, and then they can put in CAS numbers here, and it will automatically begin screening those CAS numbers for PFAS. And they can at least have a good starting point to say, okay, yes, we have one item here that contains PFAS. Maybe we can start looking at reformulating. And maybe, I think a lot of manufacturers use the HPD Builder and they never actually, for some of their products, create an HPD. They use it to help reformulate their product in the first place. And that's our goal with this sort of screening tool, is to be able to present this in a way that manufacturers can at least have a great starting point in the HPD Builder. All right. So let's get into these resources a little bit more then. So for the PFAS screening summary, let's say we do have something that contains PFAS. A manufacturer can come in here and then start understanding where to start to reduce that. So we have a checklist that we've created for manufacturers. So the first thing they're going to need to do is create a product inventory of in-house chemicals. This is where we're talking about creating the PFAS screening tool, and that's what I just demonstrated. And from there, you can create a PFAS management system within your organization. So that's where, having a time and place to take a look at PFAS and monitor it is really great. But if you're not doing an ongoing maintenance of this, then you're going to run into problems in the future. And that's difficult, right? But having some sort of management system in place is really important. And if you're looking for a really great example of that, look at Keen's Shoes. They started this, but then they started to say, okay, we need to start taking a look at our suppliers as well, which is the tier 2, which has to do with supplier screening. So, this is a little bit more difficult, obviously, if you've worked with your suppliers before. Hopefully you have good relationships with them. But this can be a difficult process because your supply chain can be so large, right? But this is where we're at least going through, at first, the supplier provided information and looking for our key terms. Sometimes using things like AI right now can at least give you a good baseline. I wouldn't completely trust it, but it can at least give you a good baseline to get through some of the documentation that you have from your suppliers. In addition to that, the next step would be asking suppliers for declarations. So that's where this resource here, this attestation request template, is really valuable, because within here, if you don't want to recreate the wheel, you can use this attestation request template to send to the suppliers, and then we reference the GSPI PFAS spreadsheet. You have to do a simple control find in order to look at the CAS number for for your supplier, but it easily talks through that in the PFAS request template. So that's where you can start, digging into your supply chain a little bit by using a couple of these tools without having login access and things like that. But again, having really good relationship with your suppliers is really important for this type of work. The next thing is you need to then add that into your PFAS management system. So Keen's Shoes, for example, what they did is they went through their entire supply chain, and from there, once they determined, what had PFAS, what didn't, they reformulated, right? They created a management system, right? This was part of their onboarding process for new suppliers because they wanted to make sure that PFAS stayed out of their shoes in the first place. So adding, this supplier questionnaire and, review for PFAS in your PFAS management system is going to be that next step. And then the final step here, it's the most precise but complex, is actually doing analytical testing. So the analytical testing, for the most part, is it can be costly, right? But there are some best practices out there right now. So the first thing you want to do, because there is cost associated with it, is you want to do a ranking, right? What has a high likelihood of containing PFAS? What has a low likelihood of containing PFAS? And then you need research accredited laboratories. Many laboratories do PFAS testing now because it's so prevalent and needed. And then you can contact the lab to figure out the recommendations for testing it. But for the most part, what we're seeing, people are looking at total fluorine testing because it just takes total fluorine present in a sample, regardless of chemical form. So it might not be in the PFAS form. We've discovered that that's the most common one to use for products for the most part. And a question that comes up a lot of times related to this is just like, well, Corey, like what happens if there's, PFAS in the water? Aren't all of our samples going to come back positive? For the most part, from what I've seen, and maybe testing has gotten better since we've done this initial research, most of these testings only go down to like 20 parts per million. And a lot of times in water, the PFAS is in the parts per billion. So you wouldn't be getting a reading necessarily from tap water, even though it might be in the water in the first place. So just an FYI on that. That was a pretty typical question that we got, but the total fluorine testing is a good starting point. And then there's some more specific tests, but a lot of times it has to be in liquid form and things like that in order to get a more specific test. But if you prioritize it on risk and then get your pricing, you can start performing that testing. And then from there, it's the same step as before. We need to start working with our suppliers to set up the analytical testing, right? Put that into your PFAS management system. And then once there's some sort of analytical testing, this is when you can actually start getting things third-party verified as well, okay? So without that testing, working with our third-party verifiers and preparers, really there's no way for them to like verify that, something doesn't have intentionally added PFAS without the testing to truly prove that, okay? So that's really the starting point for anyone, any manufacturer, and we're more than happy to help and hold hands with the manufacturer and to get started with this process within the HPD builder, because once you start using it, right, it makes it pretty easy to take the next step. And within here too, I probably need to update this. This has been almost a year now that we updated this, but we at least gave a good starting point for some of the laboratory testings for PFAS. So again, most common we're seeing is the organic fluorine testing. We give the benefits, the downfalls of it, and the conclusion, and then we go through some of the other more in-depth samples, or not samples, testing of your samples for PFAS. So that's another tool that you can use, but again, most commonly, what we're seeing is the total organic fluorine testing. And then, the question is, what do we do if PFAS is found in your product? So, the checklist is obviously making sure that we're identifying the source and then notifying stakeholders and assembling the team. So with additional regulatory, I guess, weight behind PFAS right now, really creating a team is going to be important. I know sometimes, I work with small businesses as their environmental health and safety person, right? And sometimes those product sustainability, EH&S people can kind of feel like they're on an island. This is where you really need to get a team in place. And again, ask for support. If you need the support to talk about the importance of this, talk to someone from GSPI to show the science behind it. Talk with Allison, talk with myself to help you get the support that you need so you can truly assemble that team and notify stakeholders so you can start evaluating those alternatives. Because this reformulation effort is not an easy thing to do. So we want to make sure that you have your team so you can evaluate your alternatives and then mitigate that impact and then start your corrective action plan. And from there, when you're assembling that team, a lot of times it's time to talk about enhanced testing and monitoring, right? Creating your PFAS management system. And then from there, you have to adjust your marketing, labeling, and then document and report all these things. So you're going to be getting, if you're not already getting 1 million requests for this, you're going to be getting more in the near future. So if you can document and report all of these things, then and post them like on your website or something like that, you don't have to send as many emails. And even better, a lot of times what people are doing is they're starting to just use their HPDs and they just send their HPDs to people, not only for PFAS, but for everything else as well. So that's where having an HPD can be really helpful. All right, I'm going to stop here and take a look at the chat and see if we have any questions right now. Arlene has some super fans. Nice. Good. Yep. Okay. So David, hopefully I answered that for some of the analytical testing related to the water. Yep. Is there any way to differentiate between those that are intentionally added and those that are not? So yes, within the questionnaire here, let me reset this again. Depending on what you choose here, the attestation at the end will very clearly state whether it's been intentionally added or not. Let's say no here. Can do attestation, preview. So depending on what happens within the questionnaire, it's going to very strictly say, hey, this product does not contain intentionally added PFAS, but is unknown if the PFAS has contained materials or substances from the suppliers. So depending on how you fill that out, it will let you know whether it's intentionally added or not, and whether you know that it's intentionally added or not within your supply chain as well. So it's very, very clear on the type of level of analysis you've done. And if you do lab testing, for example, or also take your suppliers do lab testing, it will also state that within the PFAS attestation on the HPD as well. Yeah. So David, David asked, concern for manufacturers, are the replacements actually safe, or do we repeat this exercise in 2 years? I think that's a really great thing that you're stating. I think that's maybe some research we could potentially do, maybe with GSPI. What are the good alternatives? And can we provide some of those resources through HPDC and GSPI for manufacturers? I think that's a good point to review. Okay, Arlene, we've got a question for you. Can you address the fact that analytical methods to measure PFAS concentrations are not available for all PFAS?
Well, PFAS is a really complicated class of 10,000 molecules, and developing an analytic technique to measure a molecule is really expensive and complicated. So basically, the analytic chemists develop the techniques for the molecules that are commonly used. And, so there's an ongoing increase in the number, but to do all, and I think it's now up to 18,000 PFAS is not, possible or efficient. But the ones that are, it's really a relatively small number that are being used in building materials and textiles, which I think are the ones of interest. And so chemists are working on it, but it's just too big a class. And that's why analytic techniques look at the whole class are very useful for at least a first screening, because what you hope is there won't be any PFAS. And then if you have to get down into which PFAS, it gets a lot more expensive and time consuming.
Great, thanks, Arlene. Allison, I think there was a question for you from Ralph. I know EPDs do not include health impacts, but would PFAS be, I'm guessing, unidentified in EPDs too, or identified in?
No, unfortunately, PFAS would not be identified in a document like an EPD. So you really need to use some sort of material ingredient report like an HPD to start to identify that, but that's only going to tell you to the reporting threshold that report reports to. And from all the research and what that we've done and shared here today, oftentimes it's going to be maybe added below that reporting threshold, so you wouldn't have that information without using some of these other tools like the PFAS attestation that Corey was sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison. Tori asked, what version of HPD is this? So the PFAS attestation is available in the version 2.3 HPD, so it is available now. We have it officially as part of our version 3.0 launch, but we made it available sooner because we knew the need was needed before our launch here at the end of September. And another question from Lindsay, are these questions about PFAS optional on the HPDs, or are manufacturers required to complete to generate the HPD? This is all optional as of now. Yep. Similar to the antimicrobials, this is optional. Does LEED Materials and Resources give credits for having PFAS within limits? This is from Sonali. Allison, do you know that one?
No, it doesn't. There are a number of credits that are addressing material ingredients, both in version 4 and version 4.1 and version 5, which will become the prevailing standard soon. But none of the credits go to the depth of having limits on PFAS.
Okay, great. All right, Arlene, we got a couple more questions for you. This is from Len. Do PFAS leach out, or are they mostly abraded into the environment? If you have used them, which is less bad?
Well, again, it depends on which PFAS. So some of them are what are called SVOC, semi-volatile organics, that are coming out all the time. Some of them are volatile. Some of them are kind of there, it can wash out. I'll just mention that we have a paper that's just going to come out where we looked at outsides of buildings as a possible source of PFAS. Just a moment, that here in San Francisco, the San Francisco Estuary Institute determined that the South Bay had a lot of PFAS, in the fish, the wildlife, the water, and there are military bases and airports there, and they explained why. But the North Bay also did, and the question was, is it coming from runoff from buildings? I know in my street, sometimes when it rains a lot, I see foamy water going to the drains, and I haven't looked, but I wonder if it's PFAS. Anyway, the answer is, this was done with Miriam Diamond in Toronto, so it's Toronto homes, but ours will be similar. that there is PFAS running off from buildings, potentially from the paint, but also things like sealants, roofing can contain PFAS, and with lots of rain falling, small amounts can leach out. So having PFAS in building exteriors is not a good thing. It ends up in the environment. Anyway, that's the bottom line from our paper that will come out. And maybe just say that if we do a monthly newsletter, which I'm just working on, it'll come out tomorrow, but if anybody wants to hear from us once a month about harmful chemicals, and I think sometimes we report on your work at HPD, so they can go to any of our websites, which we flash through, but if they put in Green Science Policy or my name, arlenebloom.com, they can sign up for our mailing list, and we'll try to keep them informed about these classes of chemicals and what's the latest. So.
Great, perfect. Another question for you: are any plastics that contain a fluorine molecule considered PFAS in the PFAS class?
Well, PFAS is anytime you have a carbon surrounded by fluorines, and that can be included in plastic. And then plastics, there can be fluorinated plastics. So they're both cases. They're as part of the plastic or as an impurity in the plastic. Best avoided. Actually, I just learned from a friend of mine who's working on certifying better plastics that don't have bad things. She's just starting a certification, perhaps working with Cradle to Cradle on it. Lauren Hine, maybe some people know her from her work on. Anyway, so Lauren said that most of the harmful chemicals in plastic are organohalogens, and in particular in building materials, a lot of the harmful chemicals. Okay, it's funny. I just got a text from Lauren with a realization about plastic. And here, I'll just share it. She texted me, and I told the world. But Lauren wrote, no, where will I find it? So she had an epiphany in realizing that most building materials with problematic chemicals are plastic-based, and most of the toxic chemicals of concern associated with plastics are halogens. That's fluorine, chlorine, or bromine. Anyway, so that's just something to think about. That I just got in a text about half an hour ago, coincidentally.
Yeah.
An answer perhaps to the question.
Great, thanks, Arlene. Camille asked, could PFAS be part of the undisclosed materials in HPDs? What are the criteria to make a chemical undisclosed in an HPD? Yeah, so Camille, some of them were considered undisclosed, but we could still tell that it was PFAS because when it was screened through the GSPI 6 classes, it still came up as GSPI PFAS class. So even if it is undisclosed, we can still do filtering to let you know whether it contains PFAS or not within the public repository, I should say. There we go. So does HPDC have plans, this is from Jack Dining, does HPDC have plans to incorporate attestations for additional classes in the future that maybe aren't flagged now? So currently, we're not planning on creating anything within the HPD builder necessarily, similarly to how we created it for PFAS. But within the HPD repository, for example, as people are requesting for, certain information, for example, like if I come back here and we go into Bora, Some architectural firms are wanting to source based on very specific criteria and flagging those. So what we're doing is we're, if they have a chemical of concern and, part of that is PFAS and we want the chemicals to be PFAS free, we can filter those HPDs to make sure that they are PFAS free. According to the GSPI 6 classes, at least, we can verify and show that to that specific architectural firm. But this is all custom based. The typical HPD repository doesn't go into this much detail. But if you wanted to create a customized dashboard, we can go into as much detail of the data as needed, right? We've got, over 10,000 HPDs that we can pull the data from. Yeah, okay, Hannah, yep, that sounds good. Yeah, so Hannah just said she'd like to collaborate more to create attestations for a couple more selected classes for Declare. So yeah, like I said, we're not planning on creating too many more attestations necessarily, but we can at least, create filterable solutions to know whether there's, beyond PFAS, you can see all of the different chemicals of concern that Bora is specifically interested in, and we're creating something similarly for some others as well. With that, I don't see any more questions. Like I said, if you do have any more questions, sorry about the scheduling issues. I was concerned that in a half hour wasn't going to be enough time, and it looks like there's plenty of time after all. Again, if you have any other questions or want any more information on the specific PFAS screening tool and maybe the repository and how you can filter things, again, book a meeting with Laura and she can help you with that. And yeah, we would love to show you some of the resources, and especially if you're a manufacturer, we'd love to be able to help you get started. And I just want to thank, our presenters as well. They did a great job. So yeah, thank you, Arlene. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Seth. Sorry again for the confusion on my part. That's my fault, but thank you for your time. And yeah, Tori, Laura can schedule dashboard meetings. Yep. All right, thank you, everyone. I'll stay on for a little bit longer if anyone else has any additional questions.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. It was really great to hear everybody's passion for this topic.
Yeah, great questions. It's good when you get good questions that people are listening, thinking, and working to reduce PFAS, which is so important. So I want to especially thank Corey and Allison for your good work on this and keeping it going.
Thank you, Arlene.
Yeah, thank you.